I'd like to call this special meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Aller.
Here.
Mr. Peterson. Present. Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much. Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Mr. Perez-Verdia is excused.
Ms. Soliton.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Next, we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Wilbur, if you can please lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next, we have the land acknowledgement. I'll be reading that today. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the indigenous people of a place. It is a public gesture of appreciation for the past and present indigenous stewardship of the lands that we now occupy. It is an actionable statement that marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook and the Dena'ina. Before I give a rundown of our agenda today, we have 3 items under items of business. I understand that there are members who would like to make a motion to change the order of the day.
Chair.
And as we get into it, if you would like my attention, I'll do my best to look around, flag me, and then we will pass the mics around so folks can speak, and it can be caught onto the record. So I will go ahead and recognize Ms. Allen, who's going to pass the mic.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to motion to move the order of the day, please.
Is there a second? Okay. Can you detail the motion? What are you trying to move, Ms. Allen?
Thank you. So I'd like to move audience participation before, I believe the administration will speak on 4A. Then after they speak, I would like to move it before 4B, please.
Second. Moved and seconded by Mr. Weddleton. Would you like to speak to the motion, Ms. Allen?
I think that for me, I would like to hear what the people in the community have to say before I render a vote on what we're voting on today.
Thank you. If you can start having the mic come back this way, please. Would any members like to speak on the motion? Yeah, Ms. LaFrance, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I need to be convinced of this because we had a public hearing on this item already, and since the ordinance was passed, a technical problem was identified as well as the fix for it, and the fix will create an equitable levy for residents living in all areas of the municipality. I see no reason to change the established assembly procedures by moving the audience participation before this because I believe there's urgency to get to the business at hand. And we have had extensive communication and conversation with our constituents in Birdwood and Turley Arm. I'm eager to get the fix underway. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Okay. I'll go ahead and recognize Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I agree with Ms. LaFrance. I would just further add that audience participation is any subject that the member of the audience would like to speak about. And I believe that would be dilatory to the project that we have before us, which is to correct the tax levy.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll? Or audio vote?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Heller?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
No.
Ms. LaFrance?
No.
Mr. Dunbar?
No.
Mr. Rivera?
No.
Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Mr. Constant?
No.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. Salatel? Okay. The motion fails 6-3.
Yes, Mr. Constant, under point of order.
For the proceedings, when we take votes, Madam Clerk, it would be desirable when somebody votes auditorily that you just repeat their vote so it gets into the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. The clerk has acknowledged that she will do that for any future votes. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, so let me go ahead and walk through our agenda that we have today. So we have 3 items on our agenda. First will be a presentation for the public record of the mayoral veto to AO 2021-36. So I will turn that over to the administration to do said presentation. Then, after that, we will go through and do a motion to amend something previously adopted, which is AO 2021-36. When the mayor vetoed this item on Friday afternoon, it suspended the implementation of the item. So when we move to amend something previously adopted, that allows us the opportunity to amend the ordinance. The administration has presented to us an amendment sponsored by Assembly Vice Chair Weddleton and Assembly Member LaFrance. After consideration and passage of that amendment, and any further discussion on the item, then we will move to override the mayoral veto with the amendment, which in effect makes the ordinance effective again and ready for implementation. So that is what we're doing tonight in a nutshell. After those 3 items, then we will go through the agenda as presented, which will be audience participation, assembly comments, and then adjournment. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to the administration for item 4A on our agenda, presentation for the public record of mayoral veto of AO 2021-36.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is J.C. Bachman, Chief Staff to the Mayor. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. And while Lance Wilbur, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, is there, and he will go through most of the presentation that we have pulled together, I wanted to start off by saying that, part of why we vetoed and what you're going to see in this presentation is our effort at correcting an anomalous result for some residents in our municipality. I think, as everyone is fully aware, last year was an unprecedented year for many reasons, not least of which was the huge amount of federal funding that came into the municipality. And part of those efforts that we undertook was to spend those dollars on our first responder payroll, thus allowing many of the COVID relief efforts, proposals that had been put forward to actually benefit all of the Anchorage residents within the entire community. And the end result was it created, as everyone is well aware of now, an anomalous calculation in the 2021 mill rate. And first, I do want to say that the calculation that was spit out within AO 2021-36 was not incorrect. The machine and the calculation worked exactly as it was supposed to, with the information that we provided it. But as we will run through, there were about 8 tax districts throughout the municipality that, for reasons, for 2 of them, that they're not in either of the police and fire service areas, or for the rest of them, they are not in the fire service area, resulted in higher than expected increases in their area-wide mill levy. So we are attempting to fix that with the amendment that will be offered tonight, and it really does address the unintended results of the mill levy formula due to the really unique and unprecedented circumstances that we have found ourselves in over the last year. And ultimately, what we are getting at is a fair and equitable tax benefit from the application of the CARES Act funds through first responder payroll to all of our different, and I believe Mr. Wilbur will correct me if I'm wrong, but 44 tax districts, to say nothing of the 47 service areas that we have within our community. So this makes the reasonable adjustment to those tax districts and fixes that inequitable distribution that was approved in AO 2021-36. It fixes it. And then finally, before I turn it over to Mr. Wilbur to go through more of the presentation, I will just say that this is a one-time adjustment. As I said a little bit earlier, the system and the way that the mill rates are calculated works. But because of the unprecedented nature of all of the federal funds, we are making this one-time adjustment, and we do not anticipate that any changes in the mill rates will be necessary in any of the future years because there will not be those federal funds continuing to come into the municipality. So with that, thank you for the time, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Wilbur to continue the presentation, and throughout I might jump in and add some additional commentary. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. My name is Lance Wilbur. I'm the Director of the Office of Management and Budget for the Municipality of Anchorage, Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly. As Mr. Bockenstead mentioned, I'm going to highlight a little bit more specificity as to the adjustments that the administration is proposing with the adjusted mill rates for 10 tax districts. I think Mr. Bockenstead did a good job explaining sort of the unique situation that we're in, this one-time adjustment that we have for the mill rates. And I'm going to be referencing a presentation. There should have been copies over there, so if members did not see a copy of it, if you want like a copy, and you don't have one, I'll give you folks a minute to follow along. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Okay. So when we set the 2021 mill rates, when we delivered the budget to the Assembly on March 13th, based on the proposed budget that we had, and then we set the mill rates based on the approved budget last Tuesday, the area-wide mill rates for the municipality of Anchorage are a little bit higher than they were last year, but it's based on basically 3 or 4 different things. One of them is we adjust the area-wide fund to make sure that our fund balance, so basically the cash that we have on hand, maintains our bond and our credit rating. So that makes sure our reserves requirements are met. We did have some higher department costs overall. We talked about that when we presented the budget and when the budget was approved. Our revenues were down a little bit last year. And then the overall lower assessed valuations across all of the municipality were down. Some areas might have been up a little bit, and some areas might have been down more than others. But the unique thing about the mill rate set in 2021, or for this year, is that the police and fire service areas, which are primarily in the municipality in the Bowl area, extend out to Eagle River, and then basically the police service area stops somewhere just around Potter Marsh. Since we used the CARES funds for first responder payroll, we did not use all of the taxes, or we need to collect less taxes in 21. So they're going to get a benefit by us applying that first responder payroll in 21. So what we want to do is we want to share that benefit to all area-wide taxpayers, not just inside the Anchorage and Police Service Fire area. So we're going to talk about our proposal on how to do that. The unintended consequences of applying it to the police and fire service areas and to the area-wide. If you live in an area where you're police, fire, and area-wide, they're going to offset each other. So basically, there's the benefit that you receive with police and fire would be offset with the increase in area-wide. However, we have 10 tax districts that do not receive that benefit of police and fire first responder payroll. So we're going to try and make this, we are proposing to make that adjustment here. On slide 3, you can see the amount of money that we applied to the fire service area and first responder payroll, and the amount that we applied to the police service area. So for the fire service area, that equals about 1.1 mils in your mill rate. And the the police is about 1.48 mils. So we're trying to apply an equal amount of relief to those areas that are not in those service areas. So I'm going to move on to slide 4. In the area-wide, when the municipality received the CARES funds and the COVID-19 relief funds, we took those dollars and then applied them to area-wide services. And here's some of the examples. We applied those funds to relief to the support for the tourism industry, small businesses, rental and mortgage assistance, child care. We also applied some funds to the Girdwood Health Clinic, Rural Cap. You can see a variety of others. This list here, until you get down to others, are those programs in area-wide where we contributed at least $1 million, and some of them multiple millions of dollars, and then we had some others. So what we have then is those particular programs in area-wide receive that benefit. So how do we go and then identify which tax districts and which service areas did not receive that benefit? So what, as Mr. Buckenstead mentioned, we have about 44 different tax districts. Some of them are in the police service area, but they are not in the fire service area. And particularly for Girdwood. Girdwood is not in the police service area, and it's not in the fire service area. And so what we had to do is make sure that we looked at all of those separate tax districts to verify which ones were in the police or which ones were in the fire, so that when we adjust the mill rate, we adjust it accurately based on this one-time adjustment. So as you can see on slide 5, I'm going to kind of detail these a little bit more. But this you can see we have 9 or 10 tax districts, or 9 on this particular page, that are either they are in the police service area but not in the fire, and that's primarily the changes here. So I'm going to turn your attention to slide 6. So before we do that, slide 6, you can see as an example, tax district 5 is Glen Alps. The dark gray area is the boundary for the police service area. The white lined area is the fire service area. You can see that tax district 5 is entirely within the police service area, but not in fire. So in this proposal, what we would do is we would give tax district 5 the same amount of tax relief that someone who lives in the fire service area would receive. And if you look down to Bear Valley is a little unique. Most of Bear Valley is all of Bear Valley is in the police service area, but only a sliver of it is in the fire service area. So those that are not, we have to make sure that those property owners are taxed accordingly with this adjustment. And then on slide 7 is Viewpoint, which is an Upper Potter Valley sort of area. You can see that odd shape, all of it is in the police service area, and most of it is outside the fire service area, but we do have to make that adjustment. For Eagle River is similarly, we have 3 districts in Eagle River. One of them is Bear Valley, Eagle River Valley. And Eagle River Valley has sort of 2. One, Eagle River Valley with streetlights, Eagle River Valley without streetlights. Both of them are in the police service area. Both of them are not in the fire service area, but they're 2 separate taxing districts, so we need to make sure we do it properly. The same thing with Gateway. Gateway is its own taxing district. It's basically right out the end of Eagle River Road. So that is in the police service area, but it's not in fire. So our task is to make sure that we adjust these rates so that they are assessed with the administration's new proposal. What's not on this picture is Girdwood. And Girdwood is pretty simple. Girdwood is not in the police service area. It's not in the fire service area. So what we're going to propose is they'll get the benefit of both. And I'm going to show you an illustration for Girdwood shortly. So let's take a look at slide 8. And the reason I wanted to show you slide 8 is slide 8 is going to illustrate the difference in the area-wide. So for area-wide services, Assembly and members of the public, we actually have 3 separate, funds, if you will, 3 separate services to area-wide. One of them is just plain area-wide services. That would be libraries, not parks, but I'm trying to think of but we have area-wide services that are not specific to a particular service area. In addition to that, the voters last year approved an area-wide service, particularly for EMS, to fund the fire department, and in Prop 4. So that's an area-wide service above just regular 101 types of funds. This year, the voters approved Prop 4, which is a separate and in addition area-wide mill levy that would be applied. So what we're doing is, when you approved the mill levies last Tuesday, we had an area-wide 101 fund set at 2.54 last time. When we make these adjustments and we're taxing to the cap, that is the administration's approach on doing these, we need to add 0.07. That gets us to 2.61. Okay? Then we add the EMS and we add the Prop 4, the APD. That gets us to an area-wide, all area-wide funds at 2.67. You follow me on the slides? And that number is important because that's how I'm going to start the illustration for Girdwood. Okay? So let's look at slide 9. If you look at the graphic, what you'll see is on the left, you'll see Girdwood Valley, and then you'll see the first responder fire relief and police first responder relief in the total. So the first line where it says Girdwood is where we left off last Tuesday. Where we would be without this adjustment. So we just talked about how area-wide would be at 2.67. You go all the way across. Girdwood, for example, they have other services that they assess themselves for, roads and other services. So that gets them that 5.07. You go all the way over to the right, about in the middle, it says total levy 16.21. You follow? So what we're going to propose is if you look down under area-wide, for Girdwood, since they are not in police service area or not in the fire service area, we are going to offer a one-time adjustment to their area-wide assessments, and we're going to give them the same amount of credit, as it were, if you live in the police or in the fire service area, and if you live in the police service area. So what will happen is, on their tax bill, they will see an adjustment down for that amount of mill levy. The end result is Girdwood's area-wide for 101, 103, and 104, area-wide, the EMS and the APD, their area-wide mill levy will be 0.05. You add in what they originally already approved. At the end of the day, their new mill rate for everything inside Girdwood would be 13.59. So basically, we went from 16.21 to 13.59, and the way it went down is because we applied basically the same benefit as others do. So we applied the same approach to the 9 other districts. And I'll turn your attention to the last page. So we talked about Girdwood, Tax District 4. We have an area-wide mill levy at 2.67. The administration would propose that we would give them a 2.62 reduction in that area-wide. So their total area-wide mill levy new with this adjustment would be 0.05. That would be the same for pretty much that section of turning it on that is outside the police service area and outside the fire. They do have a separate turning in police service that they assess themselves, but they're not in the police service area. So, and then the remainder are really just the math that we're going to apply, and I'll use Glen Alps as an example. Glen Alps service area is with the Anchorage police inside the police department, so they're already receiving the benefit of that tax adjustment. They are not receiving the benefit of fire. So we would then apply the amount of the mill levies for fire of we would subtract 1.14. The new mill levy for area-wide would then be 1.53. The same math would apply for all of the others. And I will just say, I think I'll add before I conclude, why didn't we really catch this sooner? And I think, as Mr. Bockenstead mentioned, when we applied the mill rates, we put all of the information into the districts and the service areas, and we come up with a response. Given the sort of the new considerations and frankly the unanticipated result of doing that this one-time adjustment, we did not see this adjustment. And when we presented it to the Assembly on April 13th, through our efforts to present it to you, through your efforts in the review, through the comment, through the time in the public comment period, we did not see this need to make the adjustment. It wasn't until after it was approved, and thanks to the folks in Girdwood, they noticed this. I mean, when they saw it, we wanted to make sure that we were applying the same logic and the same methodology to anyone else that might be seeing that. So that is why we caught it, or we recognized it at that time. And for the last 5 days, we've been trying to make sure that we put together this sort of one-time reasonable adjustment that's fair to everyone, not only for those that are in the police and fire service area, those that are in the area-wide in the same, but also for those that are not. They did not get that benefit of the first responder payroll. We want to make sure that they receive a similar benefit all across. So I think, in hindsight, lessons learned, what would we do? Do it a different approach? What would we do a little bit differently? I think when we look at 2022, when we prepare it, one of the things that we do in the capital budget that I think is valuable is we recognize some of the biggest projects and we highlight those big projects in the capital book. One of the things that we could do would be up to maybe some recommendations for the next administration, is that we will take a look at those tax districts, those 44, and if we see any significant jumps one way or the other, we can then highlight, however many there might be, and then recognize what those changes might be. And in our presentation to you, we would then recognize that and emphasize that a little bit more in our presentation. And I think then that will probably bring it to light. So anyway, Mr. Chairman, that's all that I have, and I hope that makes sense. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Before I turn it over to questions, does the administration have anything else? Okay, then I'll go ahead and turn it over to questions on the presentation. Did you have a question?
I didn't really put in order. I think we should have a motion on the floor before we.
Sure. So the point of order raised by Mr. Constant, just to make sure it's on the record, is that we should have a motion on the floor before we begin deliberation. I'm fine with that. If we want to go ahead and move on to item 4B, and then if members want to get in the queue for questions on the presentation or on the amendment we have before us, we can do that. So, So the clerk wanted to just double check with the administration. Is there anything further that we have to do with the acting mayor's veto? Okay. Hearing nothing, then we're going to go ahead and move on to item 4B. Reconsideration of AO 2021-36, an ordinance setting the rates of tax levy, approving the amount of 4 municipal property tax and levying taxes for all service areas of the Municipality of Anchorage general government for 2021. So at this moment, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion to amend something previously adopted.
I make the motion to amend something. Amend AO 2021-36 previously adopted.
Second. Okay. So Mr. Constant made the motion to amend AO 2021-36 previously adopted. Mr. Weddleton seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Move proposed amendment number 1.
We're not done with the motion, Mr. Weddleton. Yeah, we're still working through the motion. Yeah, is there any discussion on the motion to amend something previously adopted? Is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, hearing none, then that motion is approved unanimously, and we now have AO number 2021-36 back before us. Mr. Weddleton, I'll go ahead and recognize you for the amendment.
Move amendment number 1.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Weddleton, moved amendment number 1, and that was seconded by Ms. LaFrance. I'll go ahead and turn it to you, Mr. Weddleton, if you'd like to speak to it.
Not much to say on this. We already heard, excuse me, from Mr. Rockestad and Mr. Wilbur, and this essentially in few words, very precisely details what his presentation covered, and I recommend support. And while I have the mic, I'd like to thank Mike Edgington, who was here, who highlighted this issue, and fine work that is typical of him.
Thank you. So I'm just going to go ahead and just do a quick look to see if anyone would like to get in the queue on the amendment. I got this. Yeah, I'm just getting everyone now. Okay, so I have 3 folks in the queue on the amendment. First is Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I just want to underscore, as Mr. Weddleton did, that the whole municipality owes Mike Edgerton debt, and the people of Girdler and the outreaches of the rest of the municipality who stood to lose because of this oversight should make him the Grand Marshal of their parades.
Great, thank you. Next in the queue, we have Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 things. One question, and to Mr. Wilbur, through the chair, if I may. Would you review again or discuss again why we went with the 2.61 on line 16 versus the 2.67? And then after that, Mr. Chair, I would like to ask if Mr. Edgington from GDOT would like to comment on the proposed solution, since there was a very good discussion at your GDOT meeting on Friday. And then also if there are any other leaders of impacted community councils as well who wanted to comment on the proposed solution. Thanks.
I think, yeah.
Thank you, through the chair. Chair, some of the members of France. So I'm going to go back and look at slide 8. And when the 2.54 was the amount of the area-wide 101. Remember, area-wide has 3 different funds in it. One is 101, which is, I mentioned, like libraries and traffic and health and a variety of other ones I could remember earlier. It has all of those in area-wide. So when we originally set the mill rate, we hadn't made that adjustment. And so the 2.54 is where we started with last week. And then when we made all of these adjustments and taxing and going to the cap, we needed to add 0.07. So that gets us to 2.61. And so 2.61 will be the area-wide 101 fund. Okay, so everyone will have that one. And then how we got to 267, Ms. LaFrance, is then we add the other area-wide services, which is the EMS that was voted on last year, and we added Prop 4. So the 2 of those gets us to 0.06. So 2.61 plus 0.06 gets us to 2.67. That's how we got there.
All right, so thank you. So based on Ms. LaFrance's request, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Edgington. Yeah.
I'd like to thank all the members of the Assembly for taking up this issue and listening to me when I was screaming about it last week, and to the administration as well for going through and redoing the calculations. I do have one particular question on the presentation. So via the chair. The reductions for the APD fund and the AFD fund come to 2.68, both in the previous Ordinance 36, and I think it remains unchanged in this. The sum of the rebates which are being given to the tax district 15 and 4, 2.62, which is slightly different. I just wondered if you could, if somebody could speak to that. Maybe Mr. Wilbur could via the chair. Sorry.
Through the chair, I think when we did the assessed valuation, when we looked at the amount of mill levy reduction in the fire service area and the police service area, the 2 of those collectively was 2.62. So we tried to give you the same amount of that. So our assessment was in our calculations, in our final calculations, 1.14 for the fire, 1.48 for police. So that is how we got to the 2.62. The difference between the 2.62 and the 2.8, I think the only way that would have been is if there was adjustments in the police and fire increases that were not related to first responder payroll. That would be my only. So they had some minor increases that were automatically increased in 2021, but they weren't completely offset with the payroll. That would be how I think that difference is between those 2.
If I could just follow up, it's actually an increased reduction for the areas which are covered by AFD and APD. It would say a reduction of 2.68, which is a greater reduction than 2.62 that are being applied outside of the fire service and police department. So that would imply that there would have been if there hadn't been any change, it would have implied there was a reduction in the overall bill rate for those 2 services.
I think it would, I think it would be pretty close to Florida. Yeah, so the area-wide was probably not, based on their assessed valuation, not exactly the same amount as the first responder payroll benefit
benefit that they got in those service areas. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I might have to go away and just do a little bit more math to understand that completely. But it's close. It's definitely a lot more equitable than it was before. I'm going to have to explain this to a lot of people in Goodwood, so I appreciate any help I can have. Yeah, I think there's one or two other little comments I'd like to make. One of them is I think the statement was made earlier that it's not an error, that the math was correct. Obviously, if you're applying the wrong math to it, or you're applying old math to a situation where it no longer applies because circumstances have changed, it's an error. I think there's no doubt at all that adding another $1,000 to $2,000 to typical house prices in Goodwood unnecessarily is a mistake. So again, I understand why it's characterized as not an error, but it is an error. And the other thing I'd like to say again is just repeat, I'd like to thank everybody in this room and a number of people on the phone for attention to this when we brought it to your attention. And I know the time scale was very, very tight, and I'm very pleased that we're at a point now where it can be fixed just in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think Ms. LaFrance's last request was to see if there were any other community council representatives. Is that correct, Ms. LaFrance? Okay. So are there any other community council representatives here that would like to speak? Affected, I think, was the phrasing Ms. LaFrance used. Are you a community council representative of an affected area?
I represent an affected area, sir.
Mr. Dara, I do not believe you are a community council representative of an affected area. So you will get an opportunity to speak during audience participation. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Ms. Kennedy. You're in the queue next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, well, first of all, I have to say my thanks for those that brought forward the error here or the discrepancy, however you want to characterize that. But, you know, I certainly understand the calculations. I understand what is being done here. But I probably should have asked this question last week, and that is in regard to really why the funds that came from the COVID-19 Relief Act is actually even having an impact on our mill rate calculations and how we come up with the various district mill rates. And this is probably, you know, maybe I'm just really getting off base here, but I want to know why funding that was given to the municipality to address COVID relief issues, and we were told that we could do that for first responder payroll, and this was for last year's funding, why it even actually got an impact, or why it is having this impact on our mill rate for next year's taxation. I guess I'm missing that link there. We were told that we could not use money to backfill any kind of revenue, and actually the way we get revenue is through the mill rates that are applied to each various district. So how is it that money that we were given last year, and we used in a variety of different ways, and this is just one, the first responders payroll was just one way that we used some of the funding. We used other funding for homeless housing rental relief and some other business relief, and then of course we used our fund balance. I understand, you know, how we kind of switched the sources and used other fund balance to actually pay for some of the allocations to other more specific services and grants. But you know, all of a sudden I'm just really wondering why we're having to do this in terms of trying to make this $60 million more equitable across the entire district, when it seems to me that we shouldn't even really be talking about funding that we got last year for doing this, and we should really just be looking at what we would be doing with our mill rate for a totally new year. So anyway, if somebody can kind of make that connection for me, that would be really helpful. It just seems to me that we're not doing this with any of the other funding that we've used for a variety of other reasons. We're not trying to make something equitable across the entire municipality for all the funding that we allocated for rental relief, for instance. So anyway, why is it that the first responder payroll funding has to impact our 2021 mill rate at all? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's really my question. Why this really is connected? Thanks.
Thank you. Who from the administration would like to address that? All right, I'm not hearing anyone on the phone. So, Mr. Wilbur, do you want to go ahead and take a stab at that, and then maybe someone on the phone?
Sure.
Okay.
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy. So one of the reasons, let me see if I can take it in small pieces. So the first, let's start with the easiest one, I think. So when we received the CARES Act funds, one of the things that the Treasury guidance basically allowed, if not encouraged us to do, was to take a portion of the dollars that we received and apply it to our first responder payroll, our first responders. So we applied it to the payroll for the time when we were in the, or at least at the time when the Treasury guidance allowed us to do that. So what that did in effect is, did the taxes that we collected to spend on police and fire last year, we did not spend it all. So this year, it creates basically a fund balance in the area-wide and fire because we used the CARES funds to pay for that. So this year, with that fund balance, the amount that we have to tax them would be less because we use the first responder payroll to generate that. So when you look at those service area funds, they are in a positive situation. I mean, there's still a cost to that, but they're in a positive situation, and so that's why for police and fire, that is how that CARES funds for first responder payroll affected those two service areas. For the area-wide, what happened is all of those CARES funds that we received, and through the process of applying those in to all of the projects that I identified on the sheet here, we moved those through the area-wide fund. And so the only part of the CARES funds that came to the municipality for its operations was, I think, a little bit for some fund balance. We had a little bit in contingency, but basically it was, and that was in the approved budget. But other than that, it all went through area-wide. And as a result of that, it created a negative fund balance in area-wide. When we ended 2020, it was in the hole. So when we do because we were using those area-wide funds to support those services. And so that is why the area-wide turned to a point where we had to adjust the taxes for that. So that's as simply as I can explain it. If Mr. Swift, the CFO, is online, or Mr. Lockett said wants to add to that, I'd welcome it. So that's about as easy as I can explain.
Through the chair, this is Alex Lipka. The only thing I would add is what was characterized by Mr. Wilbur is something that we do every year. So I think this goes to Ms. Kennedy's question. Every year when we calculate the mill rates for the year we're in right now, there is a process of truing up what happened in the prior year. So as Mr. Wilbur explained, this was a unique event, which is why it had the challenges it did. But the process of truing up the taxes to the mill rate is something that we do every year, and I'll stop there.
Mr. Chair, if I could, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, well, I understand, exactly how you explained it, Mr. Wilbur. I mean, that's, yes, I've known that. But we still collected the same amount, or the municipality was still authorized to collect the amount of taxes that it was authorized to collect. So are you saying that we actually did not collect last year the amount of taxes that we were authorized to collect because we didn't have the need for it, because we were basically then operating with fund balance? Because I know our calculation, our tax is based on the amount of taxes that are collected, but compared to the amount of taxes that can be collected. So I'm assuming that nobody paid a reduction in their taxes last year in order to have the funding source switched on that $60 million that went toward the fire and first responders payroll. So I guess what I'm trying to get at too is, okay, we still collected the allowable amount of taxes last year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Wilbur responded yes to that last question.
Okay, thank you. And so that was a yes. Yeah, it was kind of hard to hear Mr. Wilbur. I can hear people who are calling in on the phone, but it's a little hard hearing people that are there in the room. So I appreciate that. So, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. For Ms. Kennedy, we're all sharing a mic, so it's when you can barely hear Lance say yes, it's because he's like 50 feet across the room. So I have a question for probably Lance, but what we did is we took in advice of Treasury, so money wouldn't lapse at the end of the year. Essentially, we hadn't spent all the CARES Act money, and we wanted to use it for its purposes. So, on Treasury's advice, we brought that money into our budget, paying first responder payroll. Now, if we had stopped there and not used that money for CARES Act COVID-19 related purposes, we would not be in this position, right? Because we would not have had an increase in area-wide spending. But because we took it into first responders and then spent it on COVID-19 related things, as we'd allocated in October, that created that area-wide spending. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so because we used the CARES Act funds for their intended purpose, we got this weird anomaly, and we're fixing that now. Okay, if we had not used the CARES Act funding properly, we would not have had this problem, right? But because we did things properly, we hit this little weird thing. Okay, I'm getting a nodding head there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for verbalizing those responses. Okay, let me just double check. Is there anyone else in the queue before we vote on the amendment? Okay, seeing no one else in the queue, members may proceed to vote on amendment number 1.
Ms. Allard?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson? Oh, yes. Mr. Allard votes yes. Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson votes yes. Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance votes yes. Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar votes yes. Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera votes yes. Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Mr. Weddleton votes yes. Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Constant votes yes. Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy votes yes. Ms. Delatel?
Yes.
Ms. Delatel votes yes. The vote, the amendment is approved 9-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, so that is the amendment, the quote-unquote fix. So now the next step in our process is to have a motion to override the mayoral veto with the amendment in place. Mr. Constant?
I move to override Mayor Clemens' veto.
Moved and seconded, Moved by Mr. Constant, seconded by Ms. Zalatel. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're in a very unique position tonight, so I just wanted to ask a process question for the clerk or for the administration. Is it possible for the mayor to withdraw a veto and let this go forward, or must we override it?
That is a question for Assembly Council.
Mr. Gates?
Thank you. Make sure that you can hear me okay. The active veto, the general veto, generally sends it back and never actually heard the process where it can be withdrawn. But I can follow the legal Friday. We had good, robust discussion of various options, and this really works out the best. With the veto, the effective date of this ordinance is not effective because it's been vetoed. That allows us to make this motion to amend something previously adopted because it wasn't effective yet. And this is the most efficient way to get this amendment in and send it back to the mayor. Now the mayor actually has a general veto power over a motion, so the mayor could have vetoed this motion before it was passed and before you do the next step on this ordinance, and it hasn't been exercised. So our next, where we are now, is to override the veto of the overall ordinance as amended. So the mayor didn't actually use any power. There's no reason to withdraw a veto because they were able to veto this amendment after it changed. So I hope that suffices.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
So I just want to note for the record that this is a very unusual veto and override process because it's done collaboratively. It's not done in a sense as two houses of government fighting each other. It's done in a manner to facilitate correction of an error to ensure that nobody is harmed by a previous action. And so I just want to note that this is a very unusual veto and override process, and I'm glad we're doing it.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? As a reminder, I believe this will require a supermajority of the body. With that, members may proceed to vote.
Ms. Allard?
Yes.
Ms. Allard votes yes. Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson votes yes. Ms. LaFrance?
Yes.
Ms. LaFrance votes yes. Mr. Dunbar?
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar votes yes. Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera votes yes. Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
Mr. Weddleton votes yes. Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Constant votes yes. Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy votes yes. Ms. Zalatel? Ms. Zalatel votes yes. The motion to override the veto on AO 2021-36 as amended is approved 9-0.
Thank you. So with that, AO number 2021-36 is in effect again. All right, so that completes our 3 items of business on the agenda. So we're going to go ahead and move forward on our agenda to audience participation. I have 1 individual on our phone list, and then after that, everyone else in the room is welcome to participate. Members of the public will have 3 minutes to participate, and please state your name for the record at the beginning of your participation, and then I will set the timer. With that, we're going to go ahead and call Lori Tripp. Hi, Ms. Trick. This is Felix Rivera. You're here with the Anchorage Assembly. We are on audience participation. You have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Lori Trick, P.O. Box 310, Girdwood, 20-year property owner, 30-year.
Ms. Trick, do you have a recording on or something in the background? If you could mute that, that would be helpful.
Oh, okay. Hold on. How's that? Is that better?
Yes, that is better. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. I had my iPad on too. Okay, start over. Lori Trick, P.O. Box 310, Girdwood, 20-year property owner, 30 years in Girdwood. My husband has been here since 1966. That's over 55 years. Members of the Assembly, Mayor, staff, Muni Budget Department, Girdwood's Kyle Kelly, GBOS and staff, and Girdwood residents, thank you for your attention on fixing the 5.07 mill rate listed in Ordinance AO 2021-36 for the Girdwood and Turnagain Arm areas. I'd also like to thank you to the Girdwood's GBOS, staff, and especially Mike Edgington. And I'm very grateful for Mike's attention to detail. Thank goodness for his efforts. I had prepared to use most of this 3 minutes to voice my concerns on this mistake, typo, whatever the Muni officials call it, and how it was allowed to be entered into AO 2021-36 and then passed by the Assembly last week. This is very perplexing and alarming to me. Mistakes like this are not acceptable in the course of municipal business. I trust you will find where and how the ball was dropped and take steps to ensure it never happens again. The administration and the Assembly need to be more attentive to the responsibilities to the people of Girdwood and Turnagain Arm area. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that completes our phone participation. So we'll go ahead and move to in-person. Welcome.
Dustin Darden, D-A-R-D-E-N. Moving forward, since the majority of the Municipality of Anchorage Assembly body has chose to have public testimony on a subject after voting for the motion, I would like to point out the direct impacts that are likely to happen. Just as the majority of this body voted for unconstitutional shutdowns, the IRS warned you as to the criminality of your spending. The source problem of this special meeting tonight was blatant laundering of money from federal money and spending it on public services, then taking money from them and purchasing buildings for your socialistic global agenda. I remind you that 18 U.S. Code 1956, laundering of monetary instruments, A1, whoever knowing that the property involved in a financial transaction represents proceeds of some form of unlawful activity, conducts or attempts to conduct such financial transactions, which in fact involves proceeds for specified unlawful activity, with the intent to promote and carrying on a specified unlawful activity, or with the intent to engage in conduct constituting a violation of Section 7201 or 7206, the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. It goes on, but I do want to get to avoid the transaction of reporting requirements under state and federal law shall be sentenced to a fine of not more than $500,000 or twice the value of the property involved in that transaction. That's the entire municipal budget and how you have frivolously spent federal funds on top of, because that is greater than $500,000, whichever is greater, or imprisonment for not more than 20 years. Both for purpose of this paragraph, a financial transaction shall be considered to be involving the proceeds of the specified unlawful activities. Now, this meeting is being monitored by the federal government because they are aware of your criminalities and they have warned you. But more importantly, this meeting is being monitored by we the people of these United States of America. And nothing that you are doing is done in secret. It's all public record, and you will be held to the full extent of the law of the land of these United States of America. Any questions?
Thank you for participating. Would anyone else like to speak? Welcome.
My name is Laurie Savitt. I have some questions regarding the presentation today. Regarding the mill rates, I got an education, I believe, on how these mill rates are produced, and my best understanding from what I heard is that you have a program in place, budgetary data points based on funds required to run the municipality are fed into this program, and the program spits out the required mill rates. Well, now you are making corrections to anomalously produced mill rates. And my question would be that this, since these mill rates are being reduced, this would seem to produce a net reduction in tax revenues. Now, I realize that this is not going to be a give and take, but I would appreciate if somebody could answer my question, what's going to happen to the mill rates in all of the remaining tax districts? Must they necessarily go up to counter the reduction of the mill rates in the corrected areas? So I hope someone will answer this question, because I think taxpayers will want to know this. Thank you.
Thank you. As I normally note during our meetings, we typically don't take questions during audience participation, but I will ask one of the members or the administration to please follow up after the meeting. Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. My name is Jamelia George. I have appeared before you in the past. And tonight, I continue to be disappointed. I feel as though you took the CARES money to solve a problem in the community that you paid no or little attention to. And now you're trying to find a sustainable tax base to build facilities, operate them, move service providers, destroy neighborhoods. You're trying to replace the CARES money that's going to go away at the end of the fiscal year. And that's not the way to run a city. You don't spend money you don't have. That's how people end up in bankruptcy. That's why this country has a deficit. And I would ask this city to remember that our acting mayor took immediate steps to try to stop this process, because it wasn't thoughtful, it wasn't well planned, you have no master plan, you have no service provider, you don't really know what you're doing, but you're willing to raise the tax base for a lot of money and hope for a solution that you can spend it on. I hope you wouldn't think this, but I'm not hopeful you will. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Come out. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Christine Hill, and I wish the equity officer was here right now, because what just happened was not equal by any means. And by the way, I'll do that job for free if you want, because what just happened is not equal, it's not right, it's not fair. The people, the businesses that suffered, that money that could have gone instead of the first responders, which was you spent properly, but not necessarily best use for all of the businesses that suffered and actually closed. Girdwood benefited from a health clinic that they wanted for years. This was a real opportunity for them to take that. So they have actually benefited greater perhaps than in my community. And again, I've said this before to you, when you make decisions, you don't, like what you were alluding to, you don't consider the consequences of your decisions. How much is that going to cost all of us taxpayers for them to now recalculate all these things in various degrees? So you're going to have to hire more people. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Are you going to speak, Mr. Hebron? Okay. Welcome.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman, Leicester resident for over 43 years, 20 of those years Anchorage resident, and currently a Valley resident. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, the decision made by the governing body is more likely the public interest. The two most important decisions you as assembly members have to make of all issues is number one is the certification of the election, and the second one is dealing with approval of the budget. When you had the last regular meeting, you had public hearing, one public hearing, that was it. And you were time restrained because the announcement at that meeting was that you needed to make a decision that night and you couldn't delay it any further. This was fast-tracked. Whoever's responsible, the end result is why we're here tonight. Someone made a mistake, a big mistake. And how did you hear about it is also alarming. The fact is that you didn't catch it, the public caught it. And where is the public? 25 chairs are in this room. That's all for the public. Away from the assembly chambers that the first mayor of Anchorage, George Sullivan, in Project 80s, moved to build this library and a place, assembly chambers, and that's where the assembly meets. But the end result, the assembly is not meeting in those chambers. The assembly end result is one microphone for the public and one moving around. And where is the recorded? How's this meeting being recorded? A clear record of each voice that's in this room and speaking is not being identified. Not someone's telling you so-and-so said this. That's not the way to run a meeting. But I'll leave you with this thing, with all due respect. I find it very appalling that you would move a meeting in this setting. You could have made a decision to have this meeting in the assembly chambers, but yes, the planning commission is downstairs, and yes, they're voting in the other big room. But did you have to do it today? Could have been tomorrow when you had a place and a spot in that assembly chambers? Was that an opportunity? Yes. But the fact is you did it anyway. And the fact is I like what Assembly Member Allard had done in that motion to bring public comment in before you went to vote. But the end result is you voted down, almost all of you. And I remind you there's a separate state law that says it's not the open meetings law to provide a reasonable opportunity to be heard. But this is not what happened tonight. Whatever happened here tonight, in all due respect, is alarming because more and more the public out there is less comfortable with what the government is doing and making decisions. You're not connecting with the people appropriately, and the end result is my time is up.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Anyone at all? Yeah. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you. Michael Sabat, and I'd like to start out with a quote from one of my all-time favorite movies, The Adventures of Robin Hood, where Robin Hood has just walked into Nottingham Castle and he's addressing Prince John and the Norman nobles. and he tells them what a sweet band of cutthroats. Now, how does that relate to what's going on? I heard a lot of tap dancing from the administration. I heard more tap dancing up here. Now, it wasn't a musical, okay, I get it. But we're not stupid. A lot of us were involved in the discussions of 2020-66. Whereas you guys were told, first by the OIG and then the Treasury Department, you cannot spend CARES Act money on those 4 buildings. But what you could get away with is taking money away from the first responders, spending that money on those on 2020-66, and then replacing the first responder money with the CARES Act money. That was the answer to Ms. Kennedy's question, not the nonsense that we heard here. It was tap danced all around that. We're not stupid. We know what happened. You guys got caught with your pants down. Not unlike our former mayor, I might add, but neither here nor there. I really don't understand why people got up here tonight to thank you for screwing up to begin with. Thank you for fixing your mistake and almost costing some of the tax base a fortune. You know what? We should do better. We need to do better. How we ended up with this is beyond anyone's imagination. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone at all? All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to assembly comments. I would suggest you do that during assembly comments. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with Ms. Kennedy, and then after Ms. Kennedy, what I will do is I will just pass the mic to Ms. Zolotel, and then we'll just go all the way around. I will ask if each member can please introduce yourself for the record before you speak. So go ahead, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Kennedy, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
We are at assembly member comments that you would like to go.
Oh, no comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This is Assembly Member Zolotel, no comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Constant here, and I'm going to return to saying thank you to Mr. Edgington and Mike. You know, the thing that we who spend a lot of time in community councils talk about is that community councils and board of supervisors are very important for our process. And that's, to me, one more time proven here in the sense that it was a public comment after the fact, but still clearly enough communicated to the body and to the administration that we need to act, that brought us together to this action. And so if ever anyone were looking for proof that this is a responsive government, this is it. And so the government we have works when you work it. And Mr. Edgington, you worked it, and I thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Bakastan or Mr. Wilbur, are you still online?
I am Mr. Wilson.
Okay, good. We had a couple comments from the public, and I just wanted to address them. And I guess the most recent one is, this might not be a precise quote, but it's close, would be that we were just told that we were told by the Inspector General and Treasury that we can't use CARES Act funds to buy buildings. Is that correct?
Through the Chair, Assembly Member Weddleton, no, it's not. When we met with the Office of Inspector General earlier last year, they ultimately said that the Secretary's office within the Treasury Department that makes the final decision. And they encouraged us to meet with them. We ultimately did. And they gave us two different options. One, it said there's no prohibition on the purchase of buildings, but it has to be purchased and people have to be in them by the end of the year last year. Now, I would just say that that was based on the timing that we were operating under at that time. That at the end of the year was actually extended through the end of this year. So if we had done it, it would have been perfectly fine. The other option that the Treasury Secretary's office encouraged us to do, and practically said, we don't understand why other communities aren't doing this because this is how we would do it, is to spend the funds that you have on your first responder payroll, thus freeing up your more general fund dollars to be spent on the different areas that are important to your individual community, thereby giving you additional flexibility to deal with the issues that have been created as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as Mr. Wilbur pointed out in his presentation, many of the funds that we used or switched from first responder payroll into general fund dollars, almost $30 million of that went to rental and mortgage assistance. $15 million went to tourism and other business-related grants. So there was a lot of other funds that were spent in a multitude of ways that helped us over the last 6 months respond to this pandemic that we have been living in. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. So then we had another comment is, having adjusted the mill rates so that some of the outlying areas in Turnigan, Arm, and Girdwood would pay less area-wide taxes. Was there a decrease in the discount to the taxpayers who are in the police service area, the fire service area, so that we collect the same amount of money? And I guess the question is this all revenue neutral?
It is revenue neutral, through the chair, it is revenue neutral in the fact that the previous version that was approved last Tuesday allowed us to tax to the tax cap. This version that you just approved also taxes to the tax cap. And essentially what we had proposed was a way that provided that same benefit to those tax districts that otherwise wouldn't have received it without this amendment. But it doesn't change the tax cap, it doesn't raise the tax cap, it just allows us in a different way, revenue neutral in your words, to tax to the tax cap.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm next. I guess the only thing I have to say is just a big thanks to all of the parties that helped make today happen, and for showing that the system, although sometimes flawed, worked the way it was supposed to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for comments this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment first on the time frame and how time was definitely of the essence to get this resolved, given the May 15th deadline of notifying property owners. So that was the reason for us to meet on Monday so that we could address this as quickly as possible. And I just wanted to echo and reiterate thanks to Mike Edgington and the Girdwood Board of Supervisors and Kyle Kelly, who brought this, thank you, Mike, to our attention, and who've been working with the administration, I know, even over the weekend to get this resolved. And definitely appreciate that swift response. Also wanted to mention, some people have asked, how could you on the Assembly, how did you miss this? How could you not see this? There are 4 of you on the body who have constituents in these areas who are impacted. And in talking with members of the administration, and just answering for myself, when you look at the mill rate sheet, there is not immediate context on it. It doesn't show year-over-year rates for the different service areas. And as we've talked about, there are a number of different service areas, there's complexity to it. So I know that the administration, as it's been mentioned, is proposing a way to show context, provide context when in the future the legislative body, the assembly, looks at those mill rates. And I know that's one thing I believe on our side we'll definitely be asking for as well. So again, thanks to all for resolving this quickly, and thanks as well to members of the body. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No comment, Steve.
Thank you. So I wanted to say I apologize to my constituency, since this did affect my constituency, for me not catching that. And the administration advising us that this is the way to go with the map. So I want to say I'm sorry for not doing that, and I thank Mike for giving me a call a few days ago and explaining a few things, and I appreciate that. The other thing I want to say is that in regards to the buildings and the purchasing, because I want to make where I stand perfectly clear. Those buildings were not to be purchased with CARES Act funds, and it was in writing in an email. It was also told us by the Department of Treasury. So when we're speaking of that, we actually moved the general funds for the first responders to the CARES Act, which could be covered, and some people are not happy with that. So what happened was, then we could take anything that we wanted to do and purchase it through the general funds. That's why. So you have to think about that. If the purchases of the buildings were allowed to be purchased with the CARE funds, then why didn't we do it? The other thing I want to say is that your taxes will go up. And it's going to be because there is a mistake, and there still is. We shouldn't have our increase of the mill rate go up so much at this point, and we're doing an independent audit. But my question is, or my statement would be on this part, is why, it's same as Ms. Kennedy said, that was never really answered in the capacity I feel it should have been, is why is the mill rate going up, and why are we paying for the CARES Act funds and the taxpayers, and this is double. This is actually increasing your mill rate because of the way they're using this maneuver with the funds. It's not okay. But we'll get to the bottom of it. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. We're adjourned.